You think you understand women, but every time she says she's fine while clearly being upset, or claims she doesn't care where you eat, but then seems disappointed with your choice, you're reminded that you're missing something crucial about female communication. Socrates, the wisest man in ancient Athens, understood something about human nature that most modern men completely overlook when it comes to relationships, and this knowledge could revolutionize how you interpret every confusing interaction you've ever had with a woman. What if her saying one thing while wanting another isn't manipulation or irrationality, but actually reveals a sophisticated form of emotional intelligence that you've been too blind to recognize? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about understanding the women in your life. Most men think they have women figured out. They read articles about what women want and believe they possess some secret knowledge about the female mind. But Socrates would laugh at this arrogance because he understood that true wisdom begins with admitting ignorance. When you think you know exactly what she means when she says she's fine, or that you should choose the restaurant, you're operating from a place of false confidence. The moment you assume you understand her communication perfectly is the moment you stop actually listening. Socrates famously declared that he knew nothing, and this wasn't humility. It was revolutionary wisdom that made him the wisest man in Athens. The paradox reveals itself when you realize that the men who struggle most with women are often those who claim to understand them completely. They've memorized pickup lines, studied body language guides, and think they can decode every female interaction like a manual. But relationships aren't equations to be solved. They're dynamic human experiences that require constant curiosity and genuine inquiry. When she says she doesn't care where you eat, but then seems disappointed with your choice, the man who thinks he knows everything gets frustrated and defensive. The wise man, following Socratic principles, asks himself what he might be missing rather than assuming she's being irrational or difficult. This intellectual humility creates space for real understanding to emerge, because you approach each interaction with fresh eyes rather than predetermined conclusions. Instead of thinking you know what all women want based on past experiences or internet wisdom, you start each conversation as an opportunity to learn something new about this specific person. Socrates taught that wisdom comes from recognizing the limits of your knowledge, and this applies perfectly to relationships where assuming you understand creates more problems than solutions. The man who embraces not knowing becomes infinitely more attractive because he's genuinely interested in discovering who she really is, rather than projecting his assumptions onto her. Picture yourself chained in a cave watching shadows on the wall. This is Plato's famous allegory, but it perfectly describes how most men perceive women's communication. You see her words and actions as mere shadows of reality, interpreting everything through the filter of what you think you already know. When she says she needs space, you immediately assume it means she's losing interest, but you're only seeing the shadow of her actual need for emotional processing. Your past experiences with other women, societal programming, and fear-based thinking create these distorted projections. Breaking free from this cave requires the painful recognition that most of what you believe about her motivations might be completely wrong. The chains that bind you in this cave are your own limiting beliefs about how women think and communicate. You assume that when she's quiet, she's angry. When she asks if you find other women attractive, she's testing you. When she says she's fine, she's definitely not fine. These assumptions feel like wisdom because they seem to predict behavior, but they're actually keeping you trapped in a cycle of misunderstanding. The shadows on the cave wall appear real until you turn around and see the actual fire casting them. Similarly, her indirect communication styles make perfect sense once you understand the social and emotional context behind them rather than just reacting to surface-level words. Escaping this cave means accepting that the journey toward understanding will be uncomfortable and will challenge everything you thought you knew. Socrates understood that most people prefer the comfort of familiar illusions to the harsh light of truth. When you finally break free and see that her saying one thing while wanting another isn't manipulation, but complex human communication shaped by vulnerability, social conditioning, and emotional intelligence, you'll never want to return to your old assumptions. Socrates never gave direct answers. Instead, He asked questions that led people to discover truth for themselves. And this approach revolutionizes how you handle confusing communication in relationships. When she says she doesn't mind what movie you watch, but her energy shifts. When you choose an action film, most men either get defensive or try to guess what she really wants. The Socratic approach involves asking gentle questions that help both of you explore what's really happening beneath the surface, instead of saying you're being confusing. You might ask what kind of mood she's in or what would make the evening feel special to her. This method transforms potential conflict into collaborative discovery, where you're both working together to understand her deeper needs. The key is learning to ask questions that invite honesty, rather than putting her on the defensive. Socratic questioning isn't interrogation. It's a dance of curiosity that makes people feel heard and understood rather than analyzed or judged. When she says she's fine, but clearly isn't, instead of pushing her to admit she's upset, you might ask if there's something on her mind or if she needs anything from you right now. These questions create safe space for authentic expression because they come from genuine care rather than frustration or the need to be right. The goal isn't to catch her in a contradiction, but to understand the emotional landscape she's navigating. This questioning approach works because it honors the complexity of human emotions and communication while avoiding the trap of mind reading or assumption making. Women often communicate indirectly because direct expression of needs or desires can feel vulnerable or socially inappropriate. By asking thoughtful questions, you're essentially giving her permission to be more direct while showing that you care enough to dig deeper than surface-level responses. Socrates declared that the unexamined life is not worth living, and this principle becomes crucial when trying to understand why communication breaks down in relationships. Before you can decode why she says one thing but wants another, you must first examine your own communication patterns and emotional triggers. Most men react to indirect communication with frustration or confusion without ever questioning why they need everything spelled out explicitly. You might demand directness while simultaneously being indirect about your own needs and fears. When she hints that she wants more quality time together and you respond with defensiveness about being busy, you're failing to examine your own resistance to vulnerability and connection. The examination process requires brutal honesty about your own contradictions and blind spots in relationships. You might say you want an independent woman, but then feel threatened when she makes decisions without consulting you. You claim to value honesty, but then get upset when she shares feelings that make you uncomfortable. Socrates would point out that you cannot understand another person's complex communication until you understand your own internal conflicts and how they shape your perception. Your past relationships, family dynamics, and cultural programming all influence how you interpret her words and actions, often in ways you're completely unconscious of. The self-examination isn't about self-criticism, but about developing the awareness necessary for genuine understanding. When you recognize that your need for direct communication might stem from anxiety about uncertainty or control issues, you can approach her indirect style with curiosity rather than irritation. The examined man realizes that relationships are mirrors reflecting both people's unconscious patterns, and true intimacy requires ongoing self-discovery alongside the discovery of your partner. Plato wrote about the noble lie that societies tell themselves to maintain order, but men tell themselves an equally powerful lie about mixed signals in relationships. You convince yourself that women are naturally confusing or manipulative rather than facing the uncomfortable truth that you might be missing something important. This life feels noble because it protects your ego and eliminates the need for deeper self-reflection or emotional growth. When she says she's happy, but her actions suggest otherwise, you rationalize it as female complexity rather than considering that she might be protecting herself from vulnerability or testing whether you care enough to pay attention. This self-deception keeps you stuck in surface-level interactions while missing the profound emotional intelligence that drives most indirect communication. The lie becomes more elaborate when you blame biology or evolution for communication breakdowns. Instead of examining the social and emotional factors at play, you tell yourself that women are hardwired to be indirect while men are naturally straightforward. But this oversimplification ignores the reality that both genders adapt their communication styles based on safety, past experiences, and desired outcomes. She might say she doesn't need anything for her birthday, while secretly hoping you'll surprise her because previous partners ignored her needs. When she was direct, the noble lie tells you she's playing games, but the truth is that she's learned to communicate in ways that protect her from disappointment, while still leaving room for genuine care to emerge. Dismantling this lie requires acknowledging that relationships are complex emotional ecosystems where both people contribute to communication patterns. Socrates would challenge you to examine whether your preference for directness is actually wisdom, or simply a way to avoid the emotional labor of truly understanding another person. Socrates believed that virtue was the highest good, but he also understood that most people struggle between their authentic selves and social expectations. When she says one thing but wants another, she's often caught between what she thinks she should want and what she actually desires deep down. Society teaches women to be agreeable, selfless, and low maintenance. So when she says she doesn't care where you eat, she might be suppressing her genuine preference to appear easygoing. This isn't deception, it's the complex dance between authenticity and social conditioning that every human being navigates daily. Understanding this internal conflict allows you to see her indirect communication as an attempt to honor both her true desires and her learned behaviors about what makes her acceptable or lovable. The gap between authentic desire and expressed need becomes wider when vulnerability feels dangerous or when past experiences have taught her that direct requests lead to rejection or conflict. She might say she's fine with a quiet night at home when she's actually craving adventure and connection, because she's learned that expressing bold desires makes her seem demanding or high maintenance. Socratic virtue demands that we examine these social pressures rather than judging the resulting communication patterns. Her saying one thing while wanting another often reflects the virtuous struggle to be true to herself while navigating relationships safely and maintaining harmony with others who might not appreciate her full authentic expression. Recognizing this virtue-authenticity tension helps you respond to indirect communication with compassion rather than frustration. When you understand that her mixed messages often stem from the challenge of being genuine while managing social expectations, you can create space for her authentic self to emerge without judgment or pressure. The Socratic method involves asking strategic questions that guide someone toward discovering truth themselves, rather than simply telling them what to think or feel. In dating, this translates to conversations that naturally reveal her authentic preferences and desires, without making her feel interrogated or analyzed. When she gives you a vague answer about weekend plans, instead of guessing what she wants or getting frustrated, you can ask questions that help her explore and express her actual feelings. You might ask what kind of energy she's looking for this weekend or what would make her feel most connected and alive. These questions aren't manipulative tactics, but genuine inquiries that honor her complexity, while helping both of you understand what she really needs. The beauty of this approach is that it removes the pressure from both of you to be mind readers or perfect communicators. Instead of trying to decode her hints and indirect statements, you're creating a collaborative process where she can safely explore and express her authentic desires. When she says she doesn't know what she wants for dinner, you can ask what flavors she's been craving lately, or what kind of atmosphere would feel good to her right now. This method works because it acknowledges that sometimes people need to think through their feelings rather than having immediate clear answers. The Socratic approach gives her permission to be uncertain while still moving toward clarity together. This questioning style also demonstrates emotional intelligence and genuine interest in understanding her as a complete person, rather than just solving the immediate problem. Women often communicate indirectly because they want to know that you care enough to dig deeper than surface-level responses, and the Socratic method naturally fulfills this need while building intimacy and trust. Socrates distinguished between knowledge and wisdom, teaching that knowledge is information, while wisdom is understanding how to apply that information with good judgment. Many men accumulate knowledge about what women want through books, articles, and past relationships, but they lack the wisdom to apply this knowledge appropriately to individual situations. You might know that women generally appreciate thoughtful gestures, but wisdom understands that the specific woman in front of you might prefer quality time over gifts, or acts of service over words of affirmation. When she says she doesn't need anything special for your anniversary, but seems disappointed with your casual approach, knowledge tells you that women often say they don't want things they actually want. Wisdom helps you understand her unique way of expressing vulnerability and desire. The difference becomes crucial when dealing with indirect communication, because wisdom recognizes that context matters more than universal rules. Knowledge might tell you that when women say they're fine, they usually aren't. But wisdom helps you discern whether she needs space to process, wants you to pursue the conversation, or is protecting herself from conflict. This deeper understanding comes from paying attention to patterns specific to her, rather than applying generic relationship advice. Socratic wisdom in relationships means recognizing that each person is unique, and that what worked with previous partners might not work with her, even if the surface behaviors seem similar. True wisdom in love involves understanding the why behind her communication patterns, rather than just recognizing the what. When you grasp that her indirect style might stem from past experiences, where directness led to rejection or conflict, you can respond with patience and curiosity rather than frustration, creating the safety she needs to eventually communicate more openly. Most relationships fail not because of incompatibility, but because both people never examine their unconscious communication patterns and how they create cycles of misunderstanding. Socrates would argue that an unexamined relationship is not worth having, because it operates on autopilot, with both partners reacting from old wounds and assumptions rather than responding to present reality. When she says one thing but wants another and you react with frustration or withdrawal, you're both trapped in patterns that neither person has bothered to investigate. You might assume she's being difficult while she assumes you don't care enough to understand her deeper needs, and these assumptions become self-fulfilling prophecies that destroy intimacy and trust. Over time, the examination process requires both people to question their default responses and explore the fears or needs driving their communication styles. Why do you need everything spelled out explicitly? And why does she struggle to express wants directly? These aren't character flaws, but learned behaviors that made sense in past contexts, but might be sabotaging your current connection. Most men never question whether their demand for directness actually creates an environment where indirect communication becomes necessary for her emotional safety. Similarly, she might never examine whether her indirect style creates confusion that pushes away partners who genuinely want to understand and please her. An examined relationship involves ongoing conversations about communication itself, not just about surface-level topics or immediate problems. When you both understand that her saying one thing while wanting another often reflects learned survival strategies rather than intentional manipulation, you can work together to create new patterns that honor both people's needs for clarity, safety, and authentic expression while building deeper intimacy through mutual understanding. Socrates faced death rather than abandon his pursuit of truth, and modern relationships require similar philosophical courage to face uncomfortable realities. About love and communication, most men lack the courage to sit with uncertainty when she communicates indirectly, preferring the false comfort of assumptions and frustration to the vulnerable work of genuine inquiry. When she says she's fine but clearly isn't, it takes courage to stay present with her emotional complexity rather than demanding immediate clarity or walking away in confusion. This courage isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing truth and understanding even when the process feels uncomfortable or threatens your ego's need to be right or in control. The deepest courage required is facing your own role in creating communication problems rather than blaming her for being confusing or indirect. Socrates taught that courage means examining your own contributions to every situation, even when it's easier to point fingers at external circumstances. If she consistently says one thing while wanting another in your relationship, you must courageously ask what you might be doing that makes direct communication feel unsafe or unwelcome. Perhaps your past reactions to her direct requests created an environment where hints and suggestions feel safer than clear statements of need. True philosophical courage means being willing to change your own patterns, rather than demanding that she change hers. This courage ultimately transforms relationships because it creates space for both people to be authentically human rather than perfect communicators. When you approach her indirect communication with brave curiosity instead of defensive frustration, you model the kind of emotional safety that eventually makes direct expression possible. While deepening intimacy through mutual understanding and acceptance, the ancient wisdom of Socrates reveals that understanding why she says one thing but wants another isn't about cracking some mysterious female code. It's about developing the intellectual humility, emotional courage, and genuine curiosity that transform surface-level interactions into profound human connection. When you approach her indirect communication with Socratic principles, you discover that what seems like contradiction is actually the complex dance of a human being, trying to honor both her authentic desires and her need for emotional safety in a world that often punishes directness. The man who embraces not knowing, who questions his own assumptions, and who has the courage to sit with uncertainty becomes infinitely more attractive because he's genuinely interested in understanding rather than controlling or fixing. Are you ready to abandon the comfortable illusions that keep you trapped in shallow relationships and embrace the challenging but rewarding path of true understanding that leads to the kind of deep connection every man secretly craves? If this resonates with your experience and you want more insights that challenge conventional dating wisdom while honoring the profound complexity of human relationships, subscribe to this channel where we explore the intersection of ancient philosophy and modern romance.